Hello, everybody. I hope that you can hear me. I'm having some tech problems, but welcome to everybody coming in. This is our webinar on science diplomacy, such an exciting webinar and a great lineup of speakers and experts joining us today. I'm joining you from the Philippines, so there is a huge typhoon coming in. So my internet is spotty, but I hope that this at least lasts for the next seconds while I welcome everybody attending this webinar. So despite the typhoon coming, it's a beautiful Wednesday night for us here in ASEAN. So still happy, still in high spirits, and very excited to be with all of you. So thank you so much for joining us. So we're just waiting for the others to come inside the room. So just a little bit more and we can start our greetings. And so while people are coming inside, I will say hello to the people here. We have Huang Ngok, hello. Susan, hello. We have La Myo Tun. Good evening from Myanmar. Yes, good evening. Good evening to everybody there. And Daniel Thomas Lopez is joining us from the UK. Hello. Nyo Nyo from Myanmar. Hello. Joseph is joining us from Nigeria. Hello. Kung Liu. Hello, Muhammad from Indonesia. Nice to meet you. And Liam is joining us from Vietnam. So I think now we can start. My name is Jenny Alma.
I think Doc Jenny has been disconnected because of technical problems. So at least we can start now.
Yes, thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. My name is Mostafa. I'm the moderator and organizer of this session. I'm the current chair of Marie Curie Alumni Association. I hope that you can see my screen. If not, please let me know. And I hope that I'm audible and you can see me. So today's topic is science diplomacy for global cooperation. I would give you a very short introduction why we want to talk about this topic and then introduce the speakers. Quite some years ago, Nobel Prize winning Egyptian-American scientist Ahmed Zawal once said that the soft power of science has the potential to reshape the global diplomacy. In his article published in 20 years ago or more, he also pointed out how science maintained a stable impact on human lives when the world was going through economic, political, and religious turbulences. Considering the current global situation, I think this quote is true more than ever. In today's world, science diplomacy has played a vital strategy and vital role in talking about the transdisciplinary, transboundary issues, global health challenges, and building bridges between countries who do not have even diplomatic relation. This increasing demand for scientific expertise in policymaking entitles the need for building capacity for next generation of researchers. This is why today we would like to give you the brief or fundamental introduction on science diplomacy, followed by a discussion what role you could play as a researcher. So before that, just want to give you a very brief overview of what MCAA is. Some of you may join the meeting of EU Asian Scientific Inaugural Meeting last month, so probably you already know. Marie Curie Alumni Association is an international nonprofit association. We have currently over well, the number is already updated. We have over 20,000 members from 150 countries. And what we try to do is basically try to understand the challenges of researchers, and we get feedback from researchers through community feedback, surveys, events, and communicate that challenges to the policymaker, to the other stakeholder, to the universities, so that so that actions could be taken on. Just to give you some overview of our initiatives, you can see in the screen, we have different career development opportunities, we have different policy opportunities, or we basically work on shaping the future of science policy, at least in Europe, as well as we provide ample networking opportunities. Now, we would also like to hear from you today. I don't know if anyone, Jenny or someone could put this Slido and the code in the chat. So who are you? So we prepare a very short survey. Please go to the code, to the Slido and answer this. We'd like to know who are you, where are you coming from, and what's your objective regarding science diplomacy? Where do you like to use it? As Jenny said, we have a really a good panel today. Our first speaker would be Lorenzo, who is a MCA member, but currently working at the Joint Research Center. He also worked as the EU Science Advice and Diplomacy Officer at the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology, and was involved with the European project S4D4C consortium. Our second speaker would be Eric, who is a visiting researcher now at the United Nations University in Brussels. He is actively involved with the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance, and mainly he just recently published a policy paper on the role of the universities on science diplomacy. He will talk about this about the same topic today. Our next two speakers would be the current chair of the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance, Angela and Stella. So they represents the German organization DLR. They will be joining with us later on because incidentally, today at the same time also the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance General Assembly is going on. Our next two speakers would be Radenka and Antonino. They both are MCA member. Radenka was the founding chair of MCA Western Balkan chapter, who basically showed how science diplomacy could play a crucial role. She will briefly discuss about that today. And then we will have Nino. Unfortunately, he will not be able to be here today, but he sent his video where he will explain what is the role of science diplomacy. So Nino is currently the chair of NCAA Science Diplomacy Task Force. Without further ado, may I invite our speakers, Eric and first Lorenzo, and then later on Eric. So Lorenzo, the floor is yours. If you would like to share the presentation, or if.
Hello, I think you can see me now. And let me also share my screen. Okay. Let me see. I guess you can see now my presentation as well. Okay.
Yes.
So first of all, thank you very much, Mostafa, for inviting me, and also for Euraccess, who is doing an excellent job at spreading the word about scientific mobility and the European research area and so forth, and also especially for the Marie Curie Alumni Association, of which I am also a member, because in the past, when I enjoyed my Maria Skłodowska Curie Action, individual fellowship, it was very useful for me to go from Spain to the UK to conduct my postdoctoral research studies. My name is Lorenzo Melchor. I work at the Joint Research Center, the European Commission's Knowledge and Science Service, but mostly everything that I'm going to show you today has been part of my previous job at the Spanish Foundation for Science and Technology and my previous relationship with the S4D4C and Horizon 2020 funded project that had got a lot of traction in the field of science diplomacy. I've got the very difficult task of giving you in a 15-20 minute presentation a response to what is science diplomacy. So what I'm going to do is basically give you a wide overview of the global context, a kind of definition for what is science diplomacy, and also kind of that definition of what is a science diplomat. And hopefully we will engage in a fruitful discussion later on in the roundtable to deepen in some of these concepts. So if we go to the next slide, let's see. Yeah, we live in a world with a lot of global challenges like climate change, population aging, famine, rise of populism, the rise also of superpowers and unfair and inequality, etc. And come on, let's be honest, we have also experienced a major breakdown in the system with the COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused a socioeconomic and public health global crisis, but has also put the relationships between science, policymaking, international relations, technology development, the vaccine development to the spotlight, bringing a lot of frictions between countries and between regions, and as well as some collaboration ongoing, okay? So one message that I want to send you across is that science and diplomacy are heavily intertwined. Globalization and interdependence and the digital revolution have both affected greatly science and diplomacy. In the world of science, there are new global magnets, new global regions for conducting research. It's no longer the Western countries, but also the Southeast Asia, which is growing quite fast. And science is more competitive than ever, but there is also a strong pressure to publish our papers or to be more collaborative and open than before. Likewise, globalization, interdependence, and digital revolution have caused several strains in the diplomatic world. There are new international power structures, multiple actors beyond the national states are playing a role in public diplomacy, and there is a need for open transparency, for openness, and an increasing value of the soft power and intangibles value of a country. And somehow, global challenges have scientific and technological solutions, but unfortunately, or fortunately, they require negotiations between countries to be implemented in a fair way if we want solutions to be available for everyone, or not. So science and diplomacy are intertwined, but not only for collaboration, also for competition. I know that most of you may be scientific researchers and approach science in a very idealistic way. Science for the global humankind, for the global good, etc. But science, technology, and innovation are also source of economic development and competitiveness. It drives international cooperation, but countries see science, technology, and innovation as a way to improve their economies and their competitiveness in the global market, in the global world. So scientific research is an asset of a nation state. And also in relation to something that I was mentioning before, the role of big technological companies or even global cities and tech clusters are increasingly playing a role in this science and diplomacy interaction, okay? As I said before, science has been used traditionally as an instrument of soft power to bring together countries that were not in very good terms, like US and China in the 79, or US and Russia. And there are certain examples of scientific collaborations that brought countries together, like CERN or the Mission Apollo, or even the Sesame project in the Middle East. So yes, science can play a role to bring together countries, okay? But we are talking about two different complete worlds. Scientists and diplomats are two strange bedfellows. They operate with different norms, interests, values, incentives. So how we can make this interface better? How they can collaborate on certain topics? So that is one question that science diplomacy tries to answer. But if you really want a definition of science diplomacy, there is not one single definition. You will find many definitions depending on the professional you are talking to. Science diplomacy is differently seen from scientists as diplomats, or from policymakers, or even from countries. Some countries understand science diplomacy in a way that is totally incompatible with other countries. So there is not a single understanding of this concept, maybe because it has become so popular. Okay, if we go back to the 2010 and a meeting with the Royal Society and the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, they tried to establish the new conceptual framework of science diplomacy. And they said, well, this is the use of scientific collaborations as a soft power tool among nations to address common problems and to build constructive international partnerships. However, if you see other papers like this one, you will see a different definition. Like, science diplomacy is an umbrella term that tries to glue together different understanding of the intersection of international relations and science policy. And also, very recently, the Madrid Declaration of Science Diplomacy by the S44C, and supported by many experts and practitioners in the field, say science diplomacy is understood as a series of practices at the intersection of science, technology, innovation, with foreign policy and diplomacy. You need to watch out something. Science diplomacy is not international scientific cooperation. International scientific cooperation is usually done between scientists and scientific organizations from different countries. When we are talking about science diplomacy, is because we are bringing different actors to academic actors to the table. And specifically, there is a geopolitical or geopolitical or political aspect to it, a foreign policy aspect linked to it. That science diplomacy paper that was published in 2010 by the Royal Society established 3 science diplomacy conceptual approaches. Basically, science in diplomacy, so all the processes that bring scientific advice into the diplomatic summits, into foreign policy, like all the discussions about the climate change that happen globally in the COP meetings every year, can be understood as a science in diplomacy action. The diplomacy for science is where diplomacy is a facilitator for international scientific collaborations, where you have a goal that not only one country can achieve it by itself, and you need to bring many countries together because it's a very expensive scientific endeavor. And you have, for instance, the installation of the SKA, multiple telescopes, etc., in South Africa and Australia, which can be understood as one of these conceptual approaches. Lastly, the science for diplomacy angle is when countries don't have a really good friendship term, and they use scientific collaboration to at least find a proper way to collaborate and to improve diplomatic relationships. This happened, for instance, recently with the installation in the Middle East of a Large Hadron Collider in Sesame, that is a really large research infrastructures, and all these countries in the Middle East are collaborating in this scientific field. As I said before, science diplomacy goes beyond international scientific cooperation because it brings many different stakeholders to the table. Concretely, you need to take on board governmental stakeholders, nation states, and probably also intergovernmental and supranational bodies like United Nations, UNESCO, OCDE, the European Commission, etc. The research and academic sector plays an interesting role, and you will see more from Eric with his explanation about the universities in the role of universities in science diplomacy. But as I said before, private sector could play a role in science and technology diplomacy, and organized civil society as well, with NGOs, civil associations, and many patrons and activists. To give you an overview of national networks and strategies, probably some of you are not aware, but countries in their embassies abroad, they tend to have people with the portfolio of science, technology, and innovation. And two really good national networks are the ones deployed by the UK Science and Innovation Network, with over 110 delegates in embassies and consulates in 40 countries, or the Swiss Next Network, with around 70 employees in 30 countries. And these are trying to bring together these countries, UK and Switzerland, with the other countries where these scientists are, these delegates are deployed to, in order to bring up more scientific collaborations or cooperation between these countries. Regional approaches are also there. Some, like the Arctic Science Agreement, or the Antarctic, or the Mediterranean collaboration on the PRIMA, or the Sesame, as I said before, are examples of regional approaches of science diplomacy, where different countries are coming together and try to find either solutions for some problems. In the PRIMA is climate change and food sustainability in a region that is very affected by climate change, and whereas other treaties like the Antarctic goes beyond that in order to see how to govern a region that is a global region like the Antarctic and doesn't belong specifically to a specific nation state. The European Commission, or is there a European strategy for science diplomacy? Well, the Council conclusions adopted on 28 September on the global approach to research and innovation calls on the Commission and the European External Action Service to develop a proper European science diplomacy agenda. And this is the result of very good efforts from different science advisory bodies, and also the Horizon 2020 funded projects where S4D4C was part of. And this strategy is currently being discussed at the moment, and hopefully it'll be produced during next year. But also there are global approaches like the Montreal Treaty for the CFC gases, or the Paris Agreement on the climate change. And obviously the SDGs are approaches that have a scientific component in it to tackle those goals. And lastly, the third part of my talk is, what is a science diplomat? So basically, science diplomacy is a very elusive term, and in a recent publication last year in the Hague Journal of Diplomacy, I tried to give a definition to a science diplomat professional. And this could be widely defined as those workers, be they scientists or diplomats, who are trying to place STI affairs, science, technology, and innovation affairs, as an important dimension or item within international relations and the international policy system. But science diplomats are not pure professionals. You could have the diplomat scientist or the scientist diplomat. You may have professionals coming from the scientific community or from the diplomatic community that work in this interface. Or alternatively, you can have mixed background professionals that are mediators or knowledge mobilizers, knowledge brokers, that try to ease this relationship between the scientific community and the diplomatic community. Namely, science diplomats can be understood as boundary spanners. Their set of skills from the world of science and the world of diplomacy are different. As I mentioned before, they belong to two different communities, but these science diplomats could be good at languages, knowledge brokering, trust building and empathy, networking activities, managing timeframes, managing uncertainty, storytelling, bringing on board some skills from the world of science and some skills from the world of diplomacy. In my publication, What is a Science Diplomat?, I tried to make a taxonomy of different profiles. Basically, they could be profiled either the umbrella of institutionalized positions, like those ones that represent that have a proper institutional portfolio of science diplomacy, and they could work at embassies, foreign representations to international organizations. They could work also at ministries, governmental departments, or other public agencies, but very linked to a government role. And they could be science counselors and attachés, science envoys, diplomatic envoys, liaison officers, tech ambassadors, chief scientific advisors, or civil servants, policy officers, etc. And on the other aspect, we could also try to consider science diplomats in a non-institutionalized position to people who eventually can engage in international summits, in international discussions to bring science and technology and innovation there. Randomly, researchers in academia and industry, or policy scientists, science managers and consultants, they could get involved in these processes. They would be non-institutionalized science diplomats, okay? But there are some challenges and recommendations here. First, science diplomacy hasn't got a clear career path, okay? Many people working in this field of science and diplomacy interface has found their way in by connecting and networking and getting themselves exposed to either the scientific community, if they came from the international affairs community, or to the international relations networking areas, to international organizations, or to governmental organizations, if they came from the scientific, with a scientific background. And even different countries have different figures, different institutionalized position, and it's not the same if you want to work for a French embassy than if you wanted to work for a UK embassy, for instance, okay? Then there are additional training and experience required. Even if you are a PhD in science, or even a PhD in many different disciplines, you may be required to go back to university and take another master in international relations, in public policy, or in public governance, because you will need to get familiar with certain concepts and languages that you haven't got it during your PhD training. Third, science is just one piece in the puzzle. Don't get frustrated because countries don't get along to tackle climate change. This is because science is just one of the pieces in the puzzle. It could bring countries together, but you need to bring more arguments to the table. And even at the end of the day, there is a political decision in place, and science may be disregarded. And we live, most of us live in democracy, so we'll need to abide by those rules. And fourth, you need to nurture your communication, networking, and institutional skills. They are very interested, they are very crucial if you want to play a knowledge mobilizer role between science and diplomacy. Lastly, word of caution, okay? Don't get too enthusiastic about science diplomacy. There is a lot of noise out there. Science diplomacy is cool. If you get trained, you are going to be very influential at the United Nations table just after 1 year. No, that's not the case. And science diplomacy is not only about collaboration, but also competition. So I would strongly encourage you to get familiar with certain recent papers that are talking about science diplomacy from a more critical perspective than you may be aware of. Lastly, if you want to get some training, the S4D4C European Science Diplomacy online course is a great asset. It's a 15-hour free online course with 8 modules that cover different aspects of science diplomacy, some of them covering some of the questions I've mentioned today. And in 3 months since it's released last year, almost 5,000 registered users were there. So please go and find this online course if you are interested. So thank you very much, and I'm looking forward for questions and answers later on in the discussion roundtable. I hope I have been on time.
We're perfectly on time, and thank you very much, Lorenzo, for a fascinating talk, especially the cautions. I really like the fact that you mentioned that the science is only one piece of the puzzle. I mean, I remember I was having a discussion with Peter Gluckman, the current president of International Science Council, who mentioned the similar challenges that the scientist needs to understand that when a political decision-making is being done, there are other issues, there are geopolitical issues, there are economy, and all these play a vital role. So thank you very much for this great talk. Now I would kindly ask Eric to share your presentation as introduced at the beginning. Eric's area of academic interest include public diplomacy, science diplomacy, the historical development of diplomacy. While at United Nations University, he was working under the supervision of Luke in establishing a research unit on modern diplomacy. So we would hear from Eric more about the role universities play in today's science diplomacy. Eric, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mostafa. And I would just first like to apologize in advance. The school is closed, so my daughter is having a bit of a tantrum. So if there's any background noise from that, I apologize. So thank you very much for the great privilege to return to the virtual stage for the EU R&I Days, ASEAN. Following Lorenzo's very comprehensive introduction to science diplomacy, you've seen that the practice is widening across many areas and many different sectors are getting more involved. However, I would like to focus in on one particular area where science diplomacy holds tremendous promise, but is hitherto rather underrepresented, and that is with universities and HEIs, or higher education institutes. And this is particularly pressing in Europe, since in the first quarter of 2022, the European Commission is expected to release the European strategy for universities. The declared aim of this strategy is to foster incentives and support mechanisms for the transformation of universities and other HEIs in the EU to better achieve objectives related to research, education, innovation, as well as contributions to society. And also to create synergies between the European research area, the ERA, and the European education area, the EEA. However, science diplomacy has not been a serious consideration in the formulation of this strategy, which in my opinion, and in the opinion of many of my colleagues, is not only a missed opportunity to embolden universities as science diplomacy actors, but also a missed opportunity to strengthen the science diplomacy system to optimally deal with this wide plethora of global challenges that, Lorenzo touched upon a few of them, and the list is very long, from climate change to global pandemics, to proliferation of nuclear weapons and artificial intelligence. But my colleagues and I at the European Science Diplomacy Alliance, which you'll hear more about after me from Stella and Angela, we recently released a paper that encourages the Commission to position science diplomacy more firmly at the center of its global approach to research and innovation. And now we're finalizing a paper that stresses the same for the European strategy for universities. So now I will just highlight some of the ample space for science diplomacy in universities and HEIs, in hopes that it will be an important consideration as not only the European strategy for universities develops, but also for universities across the world. So the first is the role that HEIs play in establishing a culture of science diplomacy. As Lorenzo spoke about, there are two scientists and diplomats. They come from two different worlds, and practitioners of science diplomacy, they tend to sort of stumble into the practice rather than aspiring to it from a young age. There's a tremendous degree of career serendipity there. So, and indeed, most members of the Science Diplomacy Alliance are either researchers and practitioners of international relations who kind of appreciate the value of incorporating the scientific dimension into the work, or on the other hand, scientists who realize the impact that their work can have on the practice of diplomacy and international relations. So this career serendipity, I don't think it's enough to ensure a robust cohort of future science diplomats who can navigate all of these problems that we face. So what is needed is a much more concerted effort to kind of bolster the culture of science diplomacy. And what better place to do that than universities? They hold great potential as the breeding grounds for science diplomacy culture. And I think if science diplomacy becomes more integral part of the narrative, then young scientists can become more engaged with international affairs, and aspiring diplomats can become more engaged with scientific curriculum. And considering the difference in skill sets, measures would be very, very valuable in bridging the skills between the two of them. And there's a lot of these new forums, such as the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution by the WEF, the World Economic Forum, and the United Nations Science, Technology, and Innovation Forum for the SDGs. These are, the prime interfaces of science and diplomacy, and thus there needs to be a very, very strong effort to develop the skills of future generations to work in these forums, and universities are a key aspect in that. So in our paper, we argue that there should be support mechanisms for encouraging a science diplomacy culture to start at the university level. Now, the second aspect that HEIs play in the realm of science diplomacy is to serve as the vanguards for the global commons of knowledge. So on one hand, the current age is defined by this long list of global challenges. But on the other, it's also defined by this exponential growth of knowledge about the problems. Like the digital revolution coupled with globalization has meant that knowledge can travel rapidly into minds anywhere, and circumventing these barriers like geography and language. So given this proliferation of knowledge, but unfortunately, it tends to be predominantly reserved in national innovation systems to bolster knowledge economies and national innovation ecosystems. So thus the global commons of knowledge, the knowledge that is mobilized for the benefit of solving these shared transborder problems, has been left rather underutilized. I mean, there's been commendable steps. For example, the European Open Science Cloud, it houses data under the umbrella of the FAIR principle: findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability. But nonetheless, the scientific knowledge is still trapped in this dichotomy between openness and competition. This is where universities come in, because they're very important centers of research, of course, and they have the potential to unlock the potential to better mitigate this array of global challenges as the vanguards of knowledge, as opposed to just the producers of it. Universities could assume emboldened science diplomacy roles as they advocate on the behalf of the knowledge that they impart, which would be quite important in reducing anti-scientism, reducing fragmentation between highly specialized fields. The silo effect is quite prominent in scientific research, and impacting debates and synthesizing knowledge for policymakers. You could look at the IPCC as sort of a model to emulate there. But there first needs to be the incentive for universities to shift away from the national spheres. And adjusting the reward system would be the key measures to be taken to accommodate that change. And supporting universities and other higher education institutions to facilitate the transformation should be a key consideration of the European strategy for universities, and perhaps a model for other universities across the world. And this sort of ties into that three-part taxonomy that Lorenzo talked about from the AAAS and the Royal Society: Science for Diplomacy, Diplomacy for Science, and Science in Diplomacy. This, if this were realized, it would be a fourth dimension, diplomacy in science, where science has its own spokespersons, and the universities, I think, would be a very suitable candidate for that role. The third aspect is utilizing the unique role HEIs hold at the cross-section of the global and the local levels. So, of course, science diplomacy has a very global scope, but the implementation is done on the local level. The SDGs are a very good example of this. They're multilaterally devised on the international stage, but they only come into fruition when applied by communities. The same is very true for a wide range of international agreements with the scientific dimension. So with that in mind, HEIs and universities, they provide essential science diplomacy contribution, both to the regional, the global, and also, well, the local and national levels as well. On the global level, universities indirectly can contribute both human resources and expertise to international organizations. And they also facilitate international connections between professors, researchers, and students from all over the world. And regionally, well, in the EU, there's this new initiative, the European University Initiative, which connects universities from all over the continent into alliances that share expertise and resources. And they have a great deal of potential when it comes to science diplomacy. I recently gave a training to the Utopia, which is one particular of the 41 alliances that are currently existing in Europe. And the student governance body of Utopia, they came for a training on science diplomacy, and we asked them to think of what their universities contribute to science diplomacy and what the alliance could contribute to science diplomacy. And their responses and their enthusiasm and engagement were very, very enlightening, which is actually what got me interested in this particular subject to begin with, because I think universities are rather underutilized in the field of science diplomacy, yet there's a great deal of potential and a great deal of enthusiasm within them. And on the local level, universities can enact policies that attract bright minds from around the globe. They can open their doors to facilities where the practice of science diplomacy is actually acted out. And there are also numerous case studies of universities and university networks working to implement the SDGs and help materialize this global vision locally. So just to conclude, universities and HEIs, they play a key role in developing forward-looking solutions, supporting democracy, and also educating a highly skilled workforce. But in order to direct internationalization processes and strategic goals in higher education towards mitigating all of these international transborder problems that we have, close collaboration between these institutions and with policymakers and other stakeholders is essential. And science diplomacy provides a very effective framework for that to happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric, for the nice description of how university could play a role Especially thanks a lot for focusing on the fact that science diplomacy need to play a role both at the global level and at the local level. So as I said at the beginning, if the audience has any question, please use the Zoom's Q&A. We will be able to discuss this during the discussion session. And please go to Slido and use the code which is mentioned at the chat. I think it's 4622289. We would like to hear from you. Who are you? What are your expectation from this session? What are your expectation regarding science diplomacy? How you plan to use it? I think we have less than 1/3 answer so far of the participant list. So I would really appreciate if you could kindly go to Slido and answer this small survey. Next to speaker would be Angela and Stella from the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance. So as explained and introduced at the beginning, they are the current chair of the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance. Angela has over 21 years of experience at DLR. She is the current head of a Brussels liaison office at the DLR Project Management Agency. And with her, Stella will also take part. She is she joined at the German Aerospace Center, or DLR, in August 2020. She also worked at the S4D4C project, which Lorenzo as well as Eric mentioned at the beginning. I will share my screen for you if that's okay. Maybe that would be easier. Please just let me know when I need to go to the next slide. Just a moment. You should be able to see the screen now.
Yes.
So, Angela, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I don't think this is the first slide though.
Oh, sorry, you are right. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mostafa, for this very kind introduction. Scylla and I have to apologize because we just 2 minutes ago, we were still in our General Assembly of the Science Diplomacy Alliance. So unfortunately, we could not follow your discussion prior to the last 2 minutes. But we did actually manage to listen to the last few comments of Eric. And I have to say, Eric, thank you very much for setting the scene for our short presentation on the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance, because what we are trying to do is we are really trying to take a bit of the serendipity out of science diplomacy pathways. And we just recently focused on the issue of young people and science diplomacy. What do they need? And how can we support them? Next slide, please. Just 4 weeks ago, we had what we call Brussels Future Talk. It's a format that the Brussels representation of the DLRPT has developed to look at forward-looking issues. And in our dual capacity as working for the Brussels office and as being the current chair of the Science Diplomacy Alliance, we focused one of the future talks on the issue of research innovation and higher education in a global context, the voice of the future generation in science diplomacy. And this is exactly what we wanted to discuss. What do young scientists need? What do young diplomats need to acquire the skills needed to actually not build on chance or on new challenges that come around often in a very unexpected, unplanned way? How do we actually support, or what do we need to have true science diplomacy career paths? What is the idea that the young generation has, and what do the experts, the senior experts, actually think on this issue? So we had an event taking place on the 24th of October looking at this issue. And we were extremely happy to see that we had participants, sorry, it was the 24th of November, looking at this issue covering continents from Africa, from Asia, from North America, and of course from Europe. We were extremely pleased to have attracted so many international participants, and we did have not only as an issue of discussion, but with us in our future talks, young scientists and young experts working already in the interfaces of science diplomacy. Next slide, please. And in the context of the issues, we were focusing on hopes, concerns, and recommendations from the young experts. And maybe I can just read to you one or two of the messages that were presented to us. And I think some of these are really exemplary for many of the discussions we have had in different contexts and arenas with young people. And that is that often the messages from scientists are lost in translation to policy and result in too little and too late in the context of action. I think this is something we can all relate to. We can also relate to this in our own work and how we see that science and science policy is tied into the grander policy discussion. So I think this is a remark that, of course, is very pertinent for young and for the next generation of science diplomats. But unfortunately, it is already also very much a problem for the senior diplomats here. I think the young and the old come together in a common plight. One remark was, I would love to see policymakers actively seeking inputs from diverse groups. What can we as researchers do, and can we help move decisions forward? I think it's a very pertinent question that we must jointly look at moving forward. And the last quote, it seems that senior expert advice seems to policy making impede youth participation in this part of science diplomacy. This is something we hope to take forward, especially in the context of the next year, which is the EU Year of Youth. Next slide, please. Now, having just focused on one of the events we just recently organized, I still would like to take the opportunity to present the Alliance to you. The European Union Science Diplomacy Alliance is a very, very young alliance. It was just established in March of this year. And it is the continuation or the evolution of 3 EU projects, 2 of which have now come to a close, and 1 of which is still going on until June of next year, which is in SciDip. I think this is also extremely important to see that the alliance is based on and a continuation of EU research projects, because very, very often everyone always talks about the sustainability and the impact of EU research projects. And I think the Alliance is an extremely good example of how research projects can be can have great impact well beyond the timing of their projects. The DLR is the current chair. We will, especially in the context of the Brussels office, Stella and I are the Brussels office of the DLR. And our chairmanship, unfortunately, is coming to a close. It's been a very exciting time, but we have a trio organization, and we will be supporting our French colleagues who will be taking over as the 1st of January of next year. And the idea of the alliance is basically to continue on and to enhance the activities and interests that were honed in the different EU projects. It's an alliance that builds on self-commitment, We have in-kind contributions to the Alliance. We are as active and as insightful as our partners are. We have 8 working groups, probably starting January 2022. We will actually even have 10 working groups, bridging very many subgroups of science diplomacy from capacity building, education, space, focusing on EU missions and on EU policy, looking at gender issues. So this gives us, this working group structure gives us the possibility to build expertise, but also to have the resources to react very spontaneously to different activities, policy discussions going on in the EU. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Here you see an overview of the members of the Alliance. It's quite a heterogeneous group. We as DLR, as a research organization, are a member. We have the Marie Curie Alumni with us. We have several universities with us, European Academy of Diplomacy, and we have advisory partners, advisory partners coming from different European and international organizations. We, for instance, work very closely with the science advisor of the European External Action Service, but also with UN groups. And so we are very open and very diverse in nature. Next slide, please. And now I would like to pass on to Stella, who will give you some insights on what's in it for young experts. Stella?
Thank you very much, Angela. Yes, hello everyone. So yes, what's in it for young experts, especially our working group on capacity building and training, the most active working group at the moment of the Alliance. Could be of interest to you. And Lorenzo had already mentioned our massive open online course, because in the Alliance, of course, we're building on the project results of the Horizon 2020 projects. And one of the key results of the S4D4C project was this massive open online course, which has reached over 6,000 students at this point. And you can find it via the website Science-Diplomacy EU. It's currently under review, so our working group under the Alliance is really busy with many of the members. Eric is there, Mostafa is there, providing input to really putting it up to date and including new topics that are of high relevance to the science diplomacy community. So, for example, we will have new focuses on the role of universities, where Eric is complementing there. The ongoing EU developments will be included. Academic freedom will play a role in the new updates. We'll have a focus on environmental diplomacy, focus on Latin America, and other resources for science diplomacy trainings that where you can find more info. Hydrogen will play a role, space diplomacy. So we have a lot of things on our to-do list in this Alliance working group, and we really invite you to have a look at this course and see if it's of interest to you. You will in the Alliance, we aim at updating the course in March, until March next year. So this will be the occasion then to have another look and see where it stands. So next slide, please. Training materials. So we're also having a lot of training resources, also from the S4D4C project, but also from the other projects that you can find on the Alliance website. So we have infographics, presentations, simulation games, exercises. We have a 45 pages toolkit for how to teach science diplomacy. Please have a look at the website if there's anything that could be of use, that could be suitable for what you need. And but of course, this working group is also offering trainings in case you need a facilitator, you want to have something bigger out of it, and feel free to contact us. But for that, of course, you would need a hosting organization, and then you can put out a request to us, and there needs to be funding involved, of course. We have done a very good example of a first joint alliance initiative on training in September and October. The alliance has organized a training for cost action participants. So the European Association for Cooperation in Science and Technology, and we had a 2 days workshop on science diplomacy in practice every day. Yeah, this is something that we want to continue and that we will focus on in the Alliance for sure. So all the training materials, of course, are open source materials. Have a look. And I see a question in the chat. Can research groups, university join the Alliance too? Yes, so individual members cannot join, but you can interact with us in different ways. But if your organization wants to become a member of the Alliance, which we have just welcomed new members at the General Assembly just now that Angela mentioned, please feel free to reach out to us. And yeah, so as we said, the Alliance is not, there's no membership fee involved. So we need in-kind contributions. So each member should really say like how they could contribute to the Alliance objectives and what they could bring into the network, because of course we cannot have a too large network because it will be difficult then to manage. Yeah. But looking forward to everyone who is interested and wants to find more. We're open for discussions and looking forward, especially, yeah, let us know if you're in Brussels, then also looking forward to in-person meetings at one point. Next slide, please. And yes, it's really important for us. We really want to foster the community building. We really want to have a large community, vivid community, and we really want to contribute. And we need young voices in the discussions, and we really want to create spaces for change of perspectives, and we need young people in the discussion. So please join us, join Twitter, get in touch with us, join the events that we're planning. There's a LinkedIn group where you can find more info about events, announcements, publications, job offers, policy developments, call for papers, and more. So yeah, join us there. Okay, I think that's it from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Angela. Thank you very much, Stella, for the nice introduction of the EU Science Diplomacy Alliance. There are some other questions coming. We will discuss them at the discussion session. We still have 2 talks to go. As I said at the beginning, that to join at the event, but he sent his video. So Antonino is the current chair of MCAA Science Diplomacy Alliance, Science Diplomacy Task Force. He is a Lisa Meitner Fellow at the University of Natural Sciences in Vienna. He will tell you about his perspective on science diplomacy. I think I do need to share with sound, so just hold on for one moment. Let me share the video. Okay, so I'm sharing the video. Let me know if you can hear the sound.
As a scientist, as an active citizen, has been marked by... Hello everyone, my name is Antonino Puglisi and I'm an Italian research chemist currently based in Vienna. My background is rooted in the natural sciences. Science has informed the way I look at the world since I was a child. My own personal journey as a scientist, as an active citizen, has been marked by embracing diversity in the Middle East. From my native Sicily in southern Italy, where I got my master's and PhD in chemistry, I moved to the UK, where I did a couple of industry-sponsored postdocs. And finally, I was hired as a senior scientist at an Oxford University spin-off company. I then decided to make a comeback to academia, motivated by the fact that a class of molecules I've been working on for the last few years has started to show some promising therapeutic effect on a rare genetic disease. Now, as I mentioned, I continue my research here in Vienna in a university in a department of nanobiotechnology. Professionally, throughout my career, I've touched on several aspects of the chemical sciences as I moved back and forth from academia to industry, and this has made me a strong proponent of interdisciplinarity. I said that my appreciation of science diplomacy springs precisely from that desire to build across different disciplines and across different cultures. In that respect, perhaps defining science diplomacy is as difficult as defining nanoscience and nanotechnology at the moment, as they have a strong denominator of being all very multidisciplinary in nature. Perhaps one of the most significant experiences I've lived in that respect was to move to Turkey on my Marie Curie individual fellowship. My EU-funded project not only gave me the unique opportunity to start off my independent research projects, as I mentioned, but also through the Marie Curie Alumni Association, made me more aware of the role that science can play for society at large. So when I moved to Turkey in 2018, together with other Turkish scientists, researchers, and academics in the country, we founded the Turkish chapter of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, that is the regional expression of the worldwide MCA community, trying to support the current and former fellows in a given region. At the time of the establishment of the Turkish chapter, I was in fact the only non-Turkish member of the association working in the country. And for me, it was a great privilege and an honor to have been made co-chair of the association. This gave me the opportunity to get to know from the inside a lot of Turkish researchers and academics, and also to gain a deep insight into the very unique and rich culture. I finally ended up staying in the country for 4 years, and they were by far the most colorful and most beautiful years of my life. I've actually managed to master quite a bit of the language, and I can defend myself in Turkish now. What I've experienced is that once you completely immerse yourself in an environment that at first sight might look so different and foreign to our own, it becomes impossible to accept any stereotypes or sweeping generalizations about the way, for instance, here in the West we look to the Middle East or the East in general, or vice versa, or about religious or cultural customs. Working as a professional, intercultural, and international scientist, I've become more increasingly aware of the sense of mission we have as a scientist as we try to tackle global challenges and work across borders. On a very personal note, I'd like to conclude that in trying to solve today's global societal problems in the world through science diplomacy, we need people who are able to speak different languages. That is, to train a new generation of scientists who can speak science as well as policy, so as to build trusted relationships across cultures. In other words, it's necessary, I believe, to accept or to include a more humanistic dimension of our scientific work in order to fully deploy the power of science and technology. To conclude, I'd like to flag up that in the Marie Curie Alumni Association, we are more recently setting up a task force on science diplomacy in order to amplify, connect, and expand important existing work within our community of researchers. Our plan for the future is to educate ourselves more about science diplomacy and to equip our members with basic understanding in science diplomacy. And with this, I thank you all for your attention. Have a nice conference.
Yeah, thanks to Antonino for his words. I hope you were able to listen to the video without any disruption. So our next speaker would be Radenka. She is the professor and assistant director of the Food Hub Center of Excellence at University of Donja Gorica in Montenegro. She was also the founding chair of MCA Western Balkan chapter. Radenka, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mostafa. Okay, Yeah, thank you for inviting me here today. So briefly, I'm a physicist, an MCA member, and member of the Science Diplomacy Task Force at the MCA that Antonino presented in his video. And I'm certainly not a science diplomat, but quite a lot of the things I'm involved in use techniques, method, and approaches that are part of science diplomacy. And practically, we can say that there is a kind of a toolkit with a range of approaches and ideas that you can use to help build bridges, coalitions, and opportunities. And in my daily work life, there are activities that I could label science diplomacy. For example, my current role at the Food Hub Center of Excellence at the University of Donja Gorica in Montenegro is very much about supporting the food safety sector in Montenegro, and that in a small way supports the SDGs related to food security. So I'm from Montenegro, which is a very small country on the Adriatic Sea that used to be part of Yugoslavia until it fell apart in the 1990s due to ethnic tensions and the rise of nationalism. So now when we think of classic diplomacy, we probably wouldn't imagine that somewhere like Montenegro is going to be very involved. But with science diplomacy, a lot of what we do is almost by default part of the wider scope of using science to build bridges and collaborative projects. And that's because we are too small to do science all by ourselves. We both lack the necessary big infrastructure and the human capacity, so we have to go looking for connections. And one of the ways in which we can do that is by using science as a route to talking about other issues or creating change. One specific example of science diplomacy in action, and that Mostafa mentioned, is creation of the MCAA Western Balkan chapter, which I set up first as an interest MCAA group in 2018, which then transformed into a chapter in 2019. And I was chairing this chapter until September this year. And now we have a new young and successful researcher from Albania, Ornel Bardi, as the chair. So our region, West Balkan region, is full of invisible fault lines and barriers that probably seem very strange to people who are not from here. And to be honest, they seem very strange to us lots of times. And let me give you an example. From my work experience in the region, in research and in academia, I worked in Montenegro now, and I worked before for a while in Serbia. It is much easier to have a bilateral or joint project with, for example, Germany or Austria or Italy than it is to create a project with a partner in Albania. And now the Albanian border is about 8 kilometers from where I'm sitting in Podgorica, the Montenegrin capital. So there is no real cross-border connectivity. And so it's often easier to work with, as I mentioned, Vienna or Berlin than it is with Sarajevo or Tirana, as well, because it is also seen as more prestigious, working with proper EU universities or institutes. So when we set up the Western Balkan chapter, I wasn't entirely sure it would work, because there aren't many cross-border transnational chapter, and even though we have a lot of shared history in the region, and we also share a lot of the same problems and opportunities, there was the basic problem that our academic communities are quite insular and close. And we wanted to have a Western Balkan chapter to be a forum for interaction between MCAA members originating from this part of the world or staying in the region for their Marie Curie fellowships, with the role of the chapter of building bridges in the region where collaboration really doesn't exist or it is not easy to be established. So we agreed that the common working language is English, and we included all of the Western Balkan territories as defined by the EU and the UN, so Albania, Bosnia, Kosovo, Montenegro, North Macedonia, and Serbia. And that's actually a big deal as Serbia and Kosovo do not recognize each other. So, and we concentrated also on the things that unite us. So, for example, we saw that there are common themes and challenges like low levels of engagement with the Marie Curie Actions program, then problems around responsible research and innovation, and lack of awareness. So that we need to build, so we realized that we need to build capacities around open science, ethics, and gender equality in research. And I can say that there aren't many organizations that have, for example, Albanians and Serbs talking and working together on a weekly basis, like it's the case in the Western Balkan chapter. And as a founding chair, I did a lot of bridge building and mediating across national and international spaces. Given the history of the Western Balkans, in particular, the relations between Serbs, Bosnians, Croats, and Kosovo Albanians, having forums for international cooperation like the Western Balkan chapter is that are regionally focused could be said to be science diplomacy. So why are we doing this? We believe in the value of building bilateral and multilateral institutions, even if that institution is an alumni association chapter with 106 members. And we talk a lot in science diplomacy about working on big projects, climate change, saving the Arctic, implementing SDGs, and so on. And these things really have value and they are important, but so does the experience of building working relations across traditional boundaries that are still very, very present and very restricted. And we can describe the Western Balkan chapter as a regional project that tries to do these things. So in reality, what are the real things we are doing? So Western Balkan chapter members are trying to build trust and to advocate for dialogue, the free exchange of ideas, and the cross-border collaboration. And in that sense, our members are real ambassadors, not just for the Marie Curie Actions as an EU funding program, but also for European values in both research and society. And we use every opportunity to promote success of our members and to organize promotional MSCA events in the region and the best practice events with our members, but also we organize career development workshops and schools for the researchers from the Western Balkan region. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Radenka, for sharing your experiences. So may I now invite all the speakers to switch on their video and come to the discussion panel. We have a little more than 10 minutes left for the discussion. As you know, we have some questions, what we prepared before, but there are a lot of questions coming in different medium, not only on Zoom, but also Slido, and also this is on live on Facebook. So we are receiving some questions. So the first question would be actually for Angela and Stella. I think it's, can individuals that are not part of any institution or representing the SD Alliance cannot join the Alliance? So
no,
if
no, unfortunately not. Of course, we can find some way to connect and to have an exchange, but the membership is not open to individuals.
Thank you, Angela. But but the Science Diplomacy Alliance actually organized a lot of events, which some are free, and I believe that anyone can take part on those events. So we would encourage them to follow the Twitter and LinkedIn, where you will also find a lot of relevant information about the Alliance.
We have many different ways of connecting and joining up. You don't need to be a member of the Alliance for that.
Exactly. Thank you, Angela. The next question is also coming from Facebook Live. There is a group called Asian Science Diplomat who give workshops on science diplomacy and also give an awarding for the scientists in the region who are science diplomats making a difference. Are you in touch with them, or could they get in touch with you? I think this is also addressed to Angela or Stella.
They can get in touch with us. As far as I know, we are not in touch with them at this point.
Good, thank you. The next question would be also open for everyone, basically. There is a comment on science diplomacy as in the clouds and may be difficult to operationalize. How do you respond to this? How can we increase understanding? Anyone who would like to jump in, or multiple panelists?
Oh, well, I think in Lorenzo's presentation, there was a very, very good, it addressed that question quite well. I think there is a tendency to overly romanticize science, and it does have often this science diplomacy often is perceived as this magic bullet to mitigate all of these global challenges, but it's still quite a new practice. I mean, the theoretical framework has only started to emerge in the last decade or so. So it's still trying to find its roots. But I think to go back to my presentation, when it comes to universities and actually constructing the skills and the networks between these two different disciplines, that's a good way to kind of deliver it into a more pragmatic future.
Thank you, Eric. Lorenzo?
Yes, thank you for the question. I think conceptualization or conceptual approaches of science diplomacy may help you operationalize that. In my presentation, because I had a limited time, I only presented the conceptualization of the Royal Society and the AAAS, but there are other conceptualizations out there that may help you understand better what type of activities may be framed under science diplomacy. One published by Tim Flink in 2010 talks about actions for access knowledge, actions for promote scientific knowledge and nation states, and actions to gain influence. I think I remember. But there are other conceptualizations. For instance, Peter Gluckman and many other scientific advisors, they talk about regional approaches, local or national approaches, and global approaches, right? And again, I mean, there's not a single definition of science diplomacy and a single understanding of it. You may need to tackle it from different conceptual approaches, and then you will find how to frame an action. The interesting thing is, okay, if you want to be involved in science diplomacy and you want to bring scientific actors as well as diplomatic or political actors together, what is it for? What do you want to achieve with that engagement? You want to raise the importance of science, technology, and innovation, or the importance of scientific evidence in global policy, or you want to build more scientific collaborations, or then if you consider the actors and the goal, it'll be better for you to understand what you are planning to do with this science diplomacy approach. But get familiar with all the conceptual approaches that are out there. I will post in the chat links for these other two publications.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. There is another question from Slido, actually from Annalena, who asked that thanks for this interesting introduction in science diplomacy. Would you say that the institutionalized science diplomat is generally more influential due to his or her access to policymakers and political institutions? Anyone who would like to jump in to this answer? Lorenzo, go ahead.
I guess because of the taxonomy I introduced, where I did the division between institutionalized and non-institutionalized. The quick answer is yes. Obviously, institutionalized positions have more leverage because they are part of a national government, regional government, supranational government, or international governmental organization. So they would have more leverage. But as I explained in that taxonomy, there is not one profile of science diplomat there. And you will see that some have more traction because they are more important, or they are higher in the administrative ladder. I mean, a chief scientific advisor that sits together with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs may have more influence than a science attaché that is at an embassy in a third country. But the thing is, obviously, yes, they have more leverage than non-institutionalized positions, because non-institutionalized positions, they don't work on science diplomacy for a living. Their main activity is scientific research or international relations affairs, etc., but they don't work 24/7 on science diplomacy.
Fully agree, Lorenzo. Anyone who would like to reflect on this question? If not, just shortly from my side, I mean, when we talk about science diplomacy, yes, institutionalization is a very important aspect. But when we are talking about the policy making, if you are living in Europe, you will see that it's not only the specific institutionalized position, there are different stakeholders who actually take part in policy making. So co-creation of workshops with the stakeholder is quite important. So wherever you are and which position you are, doesn't matter, you can always contribute. We are coming really at the end. We have still one question to go, which is, in your opinion, between the natural sciences and the social sciences, which one has more advantages and potential in carrying out science diplomacy today? That's a very good question. And I think in one of the 5 sessions I organized on science diplomacy, there is always this question. I think, I mean, please raise your hand or whoever would like to jump in. In my opinion, when we are talking about science diplomacy, it's both, because you need the skills of a social scientist, but you also need to understand the technological aspects. So you cannot go with one without the other. But yeah, please jump in. Angela, go ahead, and then Lorenzo.
Yes, thank you. I would like to support what you just said, Mostafa, but I think social sciences, of course, have the advantage of looking at policy procedures and processes. So I think the interdisciplinarity is extremely important, but the social sciences also have the additional aspect of course, looking and understanding political processes.
Thank you, Angela.
The two together is perfect.
Thank you, Lorenzo.
I fully agree. I mean, we are always competing whether social sciences must be more important than hard sciences or the other way around. And the truth is that both of them are crucial to tackle global challenges, to tackle any policy issue that you may have in mind. Let's go back to COVID-19, for instance. Yes, we relied a lot on virologists, on medical researchers, or biologists, epidemiologists, etc. But their scientific advice was somehow incomplete if wasn't accompanied by social scientists, behavioral scientists, sociologists, etc., who could understand better how specific restriction measures would be implemented and accepted by the specific citizens or by a specific country or population. So yes, let's work more in a transdisciplinary aspect, as well as we are here talking about a transboundary process where we bring scientists and diplomats together. We must bring all kinds of scientists. And some of them will be, social scientists may understand better how the international political system operates, but they would require more information about specific scientific and technological developments that their expertise is not in there. So yes, we need to go for transdisciplinary committees of experts, transdisciplinary scientists who come together and work in this field.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Thank you very much, all the speakers. There is one question, which I think the answer would be yes. One of the Facebook Live participant, can we invite you to our university to introduce science diplomacy? MCA Southeast Asia chapter are already quite expert, and I'm sure if you invite some of the speaker, depending on their availability, they might be willing to join. With this, I'd like to thank you everyone who joined in Facebook and Zoom. Thank you very much for your active participation, and special thanks to all the speakers. Thank you, Angela, Stella, Lorenzo, Eric, Radenka, and the organizer, Jenny, and Euraxis Asians. And we hope to see you in the future event. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
much,
all.
everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Mostafa. And I'm sorry about the technical issues. Thank you, everybody. It was nice to meet you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.